Welcome, everyone, to our global series on Leaders in Diversity and Inclusion speaker series with Berkeley Global and Edge in Tech. My name is Jill Finlayson, and I'm the director of the Expanding Diversity and Gender Equity in Tech initiative here at the University of California. And my co-host is Ramu Nagapan, who's the assistant dean at UC Berkeley Extension. Ramu, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you, Jill. Excited about today's conversation. As Jill mentioned, I'm one of the assistant deans at Berkeley Global, UC Berkeley Extension. This is a long-running series, and we're delighted for our conversation today.
Thank you. Well, we are very excited because today we have joining us LaDavia Drain, who is a diversity and inclusion and equity leader who brings a unique policy and public relations perspective to her work. She has mastered the art of strategic alignment through national and international relationship management and coalition building. LaDavia earned her BS in business from Miami University's Farmer School of Business and her JD from Cleveland State University's Cleveland Marshall College of Law. LaDavia began her professional career as a law firm associate at Ulmer and Byrne LLP in Cleveland, and later moved to Washington, D.C. to launch a career in politics and policy. LaDavia has held several roles on Capitol Hill, including Chief of Staff, Legislative Director, and Executive Director for the Congressional Black Caucus. LaDavia has also done a considerable amount of political work in the Hill in Washington, serving as Director of Federal and Regional Affairs for DC Mayor Muriel Bowser, and on Secretary Hillary Clinton's 2016 presidential campaign as Director of African American Outreach and Deputy Director of Congressional Affairs. LaDavia's career now centers on the intersection of diversity and technology, once serving as Amazon's U.S. Public Policy Head of Diversity and Inclusion, and now serving as Director and Global Head of Inclusion, Diversity, and Equity at Amazon Web Services. So happy to have you here. Maybe you can start out by telling us a little bit about yourself and how you came from politics into this new direction.
Sure, Jill. It's so good to be here with you all today. And thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of this really important series. Definitely a really important topic, inclusion, diversity, and equity. So again, thank you. So how I came into this work, honestly, Jill, I was born into this work. Here in the United States, there is I would say a very specific way that we do race and we do politics. And so just being born a Black woman in America has always drawn me to want things to be better for people who look like me, for people who are underrepresented. Initially, it took me to Washington, D.C. to do this work in Congress and to be an advocate in that way. But now that work has expanded. And I've found that in corporate, I'm able to leverage the work that corporations want to do and the work that we need to have done in order to bring about equity for people who look like me. So that's a part of kind of why I do this work and how I came at this work.
And how do you see, maybe just looking at what you had to do in government versus what you have to do in the corporate sector, how do you see the work being executed perhaps differently?
Well, they're definitely two totally different places and with totally different goals. But at the same time, for me, I've been able to navigate the spaces very similarly. This work is about bringing people together. And while there was probably more negotiation that happens on the Hill in a very political way, here in corporate, a little slightly different, but there's still negotiation, right? There's a pull and there's a push and there's a give and there's a take. And so in the same exact way is how I was able to navigate this work in Congress. In Congress, I work with very powerful members of Congress that happen to be minority. I was the executive director for the Congressional Black Caucus, and a lot of the work that the caucus did, it wasn't just for Black people. in the United States. They did global work for anyone who was underrepresented and who needed a voice. They're the conscious of the conscious, the voice of the voiceless. The practitioners that I do this work with in AWS, I think we see ourselves as that as well. We're the voice for the voiceless. We sit at the table and we make space for issues that matter to people who are underrepresented. So different places, definitely, not the same, different goals, but I've been able to navigate both in similar ways.
That's a great parallel. I really appreciate that voice for the voiceless transferring across. Ramu.
Yeah, thank you. LaDavia, it's great to hear the sort of compelling journey you've made, sort of series of professional transitions and the incredible impact you've had. So now, turning to your role at AWS, can you tell us a little bit more about your mandate in that position?
Yeah, so I am the global leader of inclusion, diversity, and equity. We purposefully put inclusion first as we talk about this work because we believe it's important for everyone to feel valued, for everyone to feel as though they belong. Diversity for us is, and for a lot of different corporations, it hinges on hiring. We don't want to hire people, bring them in, and then there be a leaky bucket. We want to make sure that when folks come, they want to stay, they feel like they can be successful. And so just want to really explain kind of why we put the inclusion first here. That's just a bit about how we think about this work here at AWS. But my mandate is to ensure that our employees, that our customers, that even candidates who are looking to join AWS, that candidates can join, and that there's a pipeline that's primed and ready for candidates to come here. And whereas some folks may feel as though, it's difficult to find candidates that are minority to come in and do work in technology. It is our job to make sure that that's not the case at AWS. The same for our employees. We want our employees to thrive. And so part of my mandate is ensuring that there's equity throughout the employee life cycle, regardless of your race, regardless of any protected class that you may belong to. And so that's a part of the mandate that I have. It's much more bigger, it's much more complex, but it would probably take the full time to talk more about the full mandate. But an awesome team of practitioners who are lifting this work, working directly with our business leaders in order to navigate this space within the business. So just really complex mandate, but luckily I have an awesome team and awesome partners who I work side by side with in order to get this work done.
Yeah, so just as a follow-up, in this series, we've talked to a number of really prominent leaders in this field of diversity, equity, and inclusion, different organizations, and every organization has a somewhat different definition of equity or diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I'm wondering, in your case, how would you define diversity and inclusion?
So I'll start first with how we define inclusion. For us, it's about belonging. It's a state in which all identities are valued. For diversity is about being represented. It's the full range of identities, both visible and invisible. And I do, if you don't mind, want to take the opportunity to talk about equity a bit and how we define that. Equity for us is about access and opportunity in a way that it matters to the individual concerned. It's about removing barriers to success and interrupting bias.
Great, that's helpful. And how does your leadership support you in these efforts?
Sure. So I'm fortunate that our leadership team at AWS truly understands the importance of this work and is deeply committed to progressing ID&E. This is critical because without leadership buy-in and support and accountability, there can't be real change. We know that in order to have impact, we've got to model the behaviors we want to see and the culture we're looking to foster from the very top. Our senior leaders are responsible for setting and reaching aggressive goals, viewing everything they do through an ID&E lens, fostering belonging and inclusivity on their teams, and doing the work needed in order to move the needle on our ID&E objectives.
Right, and again, every organization's a little different. And so in your case at AWS, is diversity and inclusion a top-down process, or are there avenues for staff to be involved at other levels?
Definitely not top down at Amazon. It's not Amazonian, I should say, for things to be top down. Our employees are engaged and they're invited consistently to get involved. I'll give you kind of one example. For us, we have our global inclusion ambassadors. These are inclusion, diversity, and equity evangelists. We have more than 22 chapters in 13 countries, approximately 5,000 employees, but our goal is to increase our inclusion ambassadors by 100% year over year. So definitely not top down at AWS. Much engagement by our employees.
That's amazing. And you talk about being in 13 different countries, obviously different cultures, very large organizations. So how do you make change happen in a large organization like that?
One step at a time, putting one foot in front of the other. But to be very specific, we set goals. We set goals and we measure. We measure our progress. We don't use good intentions, we use mechanisms so that we can ensure that we're making progress. That's how you make change at large organizations. You give it the same attention, you use the same rigor that you use in business when you're looking to reach goals in the area of inclusion, diversity, and equity.
And you talk about there's that saying, meet people where they are. Do you find you have to kind of have different phases of bringing people into this conversation?
Sure. You absolutely have to meet people where they are, and that, that's not just a principle in the work that we do. I think that that's just a principle in doing life with others. You have to meet people where they are. So I'll just give you a specific example. We offer different levels of training for our employees, and we tailor them for every point in the employee life cycle. And that's again for that very reason that you have to meet people where they are.
Well, I was really excited to hear you talk about the leaky bucket and how you're really focused on the retention. Can you talk a little bit more about kind of what you're doing around retention? And then maybe we can circle back to the hiring part as well.
Sure. A lot of work happening around retention. So, if you don't mind, is it okay if I take retention and hiring together? We look at
Sure.
this at Amazon and at AWS as representation. So, representation for us is the hiring, it's the promotion, and it's the retention. So, I'll just walk you through some goals that we set out to take. We set out and we took on in 2020, and we're taking them again in 2021. So, we committed as a company to double the representation of our Black VPs and directors in 2020, and then double them again in 2021. To reach this goal, we're not only focusing on hiring, but also retention and promotion. As I mentioned, in AWS, we use input goals and mechanisms in both executive recruitment and retention efforts for our Black leaders. Externally, we identify and we recruit the right Black leaders, and internally, we conduct deep inspections of our end-to-end talent processes to identify retention risks for Black leaders and create development paths for promotion opportunities. We also we're also setting out to increase the hiring of Black talent at all levels, including our industry hiring and our campus hirings and intern pipelines. I talked a bit about how we use mechanisms and not good intentions to drive improvement. So I'll just dig a little bit deeper there. We're building the capabilities to inspect decision making in real time in mechanisms such as hiring and promotion. Where we see potential for bias at key decision points, we're implementing bias interrupters and new checks and balances. So in AWS, we're actually implementing company-wide changes to our talent processes and products, specifically in how diversity data is inspected in annual review and appraisal cycles and other talent decisions. So that's just a little bit about how we look at representation and again, hiring, retention, and promotion.
Can you say a little bit more about the bias interrupters and maybe how other companies could do that as well?
Well, it's probably a longer conversation than what we could get at today, but I'll give you an example. So in our life cycle, right, as employees, you have folks from the attract phase all the way through the phase when folks are headed out of the door. There are different points in that life cycle, right? That you have some folks that get more development opportunities or get more opportunities to advance, are promoted at a faster clip. Well, we're seeking to bust any bias that's in any part of that life cycle so that there's equity across the life cycle regardless of how you look, right? Regardless of if you present with a disability, regardless of your sexual orientation. And so specifically right now, we're looking a lot at race, among other areas, but definitely looking at race and how we get in there at every single point in that life cycle, to make sure that we get to root causes where there could be bias, where there's potential for bias, where there's a gap where bias could seep in, and we surface the insights there and work on a plan to address that place where there could be potential bias. Hopefully that's
That-
helpful. I know it's
yeah,
kind of complicated, but
no,
that's how
it's
we look at
important
it
to
here.
get down to those kind of the details and thinking about it, because as we've seen with gender, women are less likely to get the stretch assignments or the sponsorship to be raised.
That's right.
And so looking at those root causes is really a critical piece of the pie. And speaking of women, we know that like 2 million women left the workforce. What is Amazon doing, or how has hiring changed maybe to bring back some of those women into the workforce, or just in general, how are you reacting to the kind of the COVID situation?
Sure. So we've actually implemented some very specific things that specifically I think have helped women during COVID. So personal leave of absence is something that women can take without question. Flexible and reduced time options. Another example, we provide pre-screened child and adult backup care as well. COVID-19 support for all employees. We provide in the US via our grand rounds, and that's regardless of whether they are enrolled in our healthcare plans. We offer parent discounts, including tutoring and childcare, preferred platforms for finding care, tutoring and learning, pod matching. We offer support from other parents through our employee family resource groups, and we host webinars and provide reference materials on balancing work and return to school. And I have to mention, as we go into Mental Health Awareness Month, that we do at Amazon take mental health support very seriously, and offer mental health support for our employees.
That's amazing, and certainly the case that women disproportionately feel more stressed to be always on. And so glad to hear that that's part of the approach.
So maybe shifting gears a little bit, we've just touched on COVID. It's been an incredibly difficult year this last year in many
Yeah.
domains, with the pandemic and with a real reckoning around racial justice. What are you optimistic about right now?
I got to tell you, I try to be optimistic about everything. I can't give pessimism a moment in my day. Number one, I'm too busy. Number two, I think that the minute that I stop being optimistic, it's day two. And if you know anything about Amazon, you know that we have a day one culture. And whenever we enter into day two, that means we're declining, we're diminishing. And so for me to not be optimistic would mean that I would enter into day two, and it's time for me not to do this work anymore.
Yeah. And kind of riffing off that a little bit, what advice would you have for other organizations? How can they be optimistic, and how can they hire, other leaders like you who can make that kind of impact?
Yeah, and if your question is specifically around hiring diversity and inclusion leaders, because I know a lot of companies, decided last year after the murder of George Floyd that they would, hire their chief diversity officers, some for the very first time. I'll be very specific and very honest about this. Number one, I would advise companies to be honest about where they are on their own journey as a company. So, this expectation that you'll hire someone, usually someone of color, to come in and to fix things that you've never tried to fix before, that you've never done a deep inspection on before. It's almost as if you're looking for magic, and we're not magical. And I think that it's important for companies to really be honest at where they're at, and to look for leaders that will help them where they are, and put them in a position to take them to the next level. but that the company has to do the work, right? There's work beyond just the work that an inclusion or diversity leader brings. There's work that executives have to do. There's work that business leaders have to do. It's a partnership. And so that would be, kind of my advice to organizations that are looking for leaders in diversity and inclusion.
So I've heard about, we talked a little bit about the different pathways for breaking up bias, interrupting bias. Employee resource groups are often something that's brought up. Can you talk a little bit? I think there's a Black Employee Network, RISE. There's some different groups. Can you tell us a little bit about the groups that you have?
Sure. So you mentioned RISE, and I'll talk a bit about the Black Employee Network's RISE program, which is an awesome, equity advancement program that we launched recently. But specifically, we have 90 different affinity groups, thousands and thousands, tens and thousands of employees that are engaged across the world in our affinity groups, doing some amazing work. And our affinity groups run the gamut. And so that's something that could definitely be found on our website if folks are more interested in looking at what type of affinity groups we offer. Would love to lift up an example of how AWS is promoting equitable and advancement in partnership with our affinity group. So the Black Employee Network, we affectionately call BEN, launched this month. I'd had to remember what month I was in. We launched the RISE program, and RISE is designed as an 8-month program that leverages the power of connection, coaching, and informal sponsorship to build future Black L8 leaders. It's a pilot right now, but we do, and it includes a US-based cohort from AWS, our human resources organization, and our devices businesses, but we expect that it's going to expand out pan-Amazon to our global population in the near future. And while the RISE program is dedicated to investing in Black leaders, we're also creating new opportunities for leaders across the company to learn from this incredible cohort and the cohorts to come. So really excited about our affinity groups, and just RISE is one of those, just one, I should say, specific program where our leaders, our business leaders, are partnering with our affinity groups to make real change and equitable advancement.
Super great. I'm going to throw in a question. We see we're getting a lot of questions already coming into the Q&A. And this one's sort of related to this question. Trevor Collins asks, is AWS an island in Amazon? Do these principles apply to warehouse operations, to other parts of the organization?
Yeah, no, we are not an island. We are 100% a part of the Amazon family. And so we're just one business in Amazon. We are the cloud computing business within Amazon.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Can you tell us a little bit about how AWS has celebrated International Women's Day?
Sure. So for IWD, we launched a global digital campaign called The Face of Innovation. It was a collaboration with the visual artists, and it celebrates women of AWS through a series of 30 illustrated portraits of women builders across our global organization. We also launched a new AWS Builders Story Series, which features our women technologists from across the world. We hosted a fireside chat with one of the founders of Black Lives Matter, Patrisse Cullors. And we I was the moderator for an event with our top women executives from across the company, just giving advice on advancement, just real life advice for our women in general. And we also hosted webinars as well. So I literally did not mention everything that we did. Our Women At, which is our affinity group for women at Amazon, really does an awesome job, not only during IWD and Women's History Month, but year long. But those are just some of the things that we in AWS specifically did for International Women's Day this year.
It's great to hear, these programs. You say you gave some of the talks, or do you also mentor? Are there mentoring programs? How else are women kind of getting the support?
Well, so definitely there's mentorship programs, there's sponsorship programs. We have some specific in AWS that are specific to women technologists. We have some specific to Black women that we're launching. But I mean, our company is really, rich and has a lot going on in a lot of different places. So I don't want to undersell what we have going on by not mentioning everything, but absolutely there's many opportunities for mentorship and sponsorship, formal opportunities and informal opportunities.
Have you yourself been a mentor or been menteed?
Well, I'm a forever mentee. I will always seek mentors. It's how it's just a part of who I am. I'm always looking for advice. If I'm an only child, so whenever I can get advice to avoid getting into trouble, it's what I do. So I do that with my mentors. But I actually reserve every morning from 8:45 a.m. to 9:15 a.m. for calls with anyone who's looking for advice or mentorship. And I'm dedicated to that. I leave that time open. I literally drop my children off. They get out of the car at 8:40 a.m. and I jump onto usually every single morning a call with someone, whether it's about getting into this space. I get folks on LinkedIn who are looking for advice, folks within the company, people that I work with at Washington or are looking to come into this space or just come into Amazon in general. I definitely take my responsibility as a mentor very seriously and dedicate time for it pretty much every single day. You have to lift as you climb, and so for me, there's nothing more fulfilling than being able to pour into the lives of someone else. And I'm able to do that constantly through mentorship.
For many people, you're so accomplished, it seems too far away. Can you give us your first win, kind of go back to the first mentorship you had that got you
Oh, wow.
over a hump?
My first win as a mentor, Hanjio. Oh, goodness. I should have thought about this question so that I can be really thoughtful in how I answer it. And I'll just say, literally, I'll just go back to the first time someone asked me to be a mentor, and I realized that I was no longer just the mentee, that I had something to give to someone else. And it happened to me pretty early on in my career, but I would say that literally is the first big win because it opened the door for me to be and to be equipped to be a mentor for others. And so I guess I count that as my first big win.
Thank you.
Sure.
So I wanted to go back for a moment to the bigger picture at AWS. And so can you share how diversity, equity, inclusion are manifested in company goals and your big wins and goals?
Sure. So just last week, we released our 2021 company-wide diversity, equity, and inclusion goals. We're continuing our goals to increase our representation. We talked about this a little bit earlier for our Black employees in the U.S. And then we know that we have further to go. Nearly all of the new goals that we've set this year affect all communities, specifically by addressing situations in which employees from a diverse set of backgrounds have different experience than their peers in areas like development, retention, and talent assessment. Also, we talked about this earlier in our conversation. And I can just talk to you a bit about what those company-wide goals are for us for 2021. Bear with me because we do have a lot of them because we are taking this very seriously and in a very intentional way here. So we're inspecting any statistically significant demographic differences in our performance ratings and working with our vice presidents to kind of identify root causes. We talked about root causes a little bit earlier today. We're inspecting statistically significant demographic differences in attrition and low performance actions. Also working with our vice president teams in order to do this. So as you can see, our executives are involved at every step of the way. We're looking to retain employees at statistically similar rates across all demographics. We're building scalable mechanisms in what we call our connections to inspect inclusion sentiment by demographics for all employees. And so for us, just a bit about connections. Every day when I log onto my computer, and every day when any Amazonian, so not just in AWS, but across Amazon, logs onto their computer, you get a question. And so the question is just our way of keeping a pulse on our employees, right? And also receiving feedback. And so these connection questions also help us to measure how we're doing in inclusion. Do people feel valued? Do they feel like they belong in AWS? So just wanted to give you that context. We're ensuring that 100%, not 50%, not 30%, but 100% of all Amazonians take company-wide inclusion training. We're building mechanisms so that we can root out non-inclusive terms in our code. So that's something that a lot of different tech companies are looking at now, and we're focusing on it here at Amazon and AWS. We talked about this, but for the second year in a row, we're doubling our Black execs at the VP and the director level. We're increasing our US Black employees as well. We started that in 2020. We'll continue it again this year. And a new goal that we're taking this year, we're specifically and intentionally looking at our executive women that are in STEM fields. So our senior principals, our directors, our VPs, our distinguished engineers in these tech and science roles, and we're looking to increase that number. We're increasing our US Black software development engineer interns. So for those out there that are software development majors, look for our internship opportunities at Amazon. And we're looking to reach 1.6 million underrepresented students globally through our Amazon Future Engineers program. And that's our computer sciences learning program. So really excited about the work we're doing. We do not brag about our work at Amazon. We put our heads down and we focus on our customer. We work backwards from our customer. But in this case, I'm really proud that Amazon has been so open with the goals that we're taking, because I do believe that it'll challenge other companies in this industry and outside of this industry globally to do the same or similar, or even take even greater goals, because ultimately the goal here is not just for Amazonians or people who seek to be Amazonians that are from underrepresented classes to do better, but for folks all over the world, right? Going back to that voice of the voiceless, that's what we seek to do here at AWS and at Amazon.
So just out of curiosity, with this very ambitious program to support future engineers, are you partnering with other universities or organizations, or how does that work?
It's probably better for me to let the Amazon Future Engineers team kind of answer that question. It's a goal that we took this year, so more to come on how that work will be done. But happy to come back and visit with you again with the Amazon Future Engineers team to talk about that.
Sure, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, of course, I'm super excited that you're focusing on women in tech. Oftentimes companies are not even measuring, the representation of women in the tech roles. They just measure it overall. And it's so important to kind of break it down and disaggregate it and look at that. So I'm very excited to hear about that. Are you, as a large company, also looking at the pipeline and community partners? I think you've worked with maybe Girls in Tech. Are there other organizations that you're partnering with to kind of build the earlier pipeline?
Sure. So I'll just call out for my team 3 specific national organizations that have a global reach that we're working with. Girls in Tech is one. The second is the National Society of Black Engineers Junior Program, so short NSBE Junior, and also Deaf Kids Code. So those are 3 organizations where we're focusing on in order to kind of build that pipeline from the very early years of a child's progression.
Yeah, because role models and representation so absolutely key at that young age, because the girls' confidence, I think it's something like in middle school, their confidence is quite high, but by high school it's dropped and it never really recovers. So these type of things I think are super valuable to have. Another thing I think employees are getting very excited about is, what is the company going to do socially around climate change? What is the role of the company in sustainability?
Yeah, so we actually have. I think I'm probably going to take it out here too, because there is a person on our team that does sustainability work that I'd love to be able to kind of break down exactly what we're doing around sustainability, separate and apart from our inclusion, diversity, and equity work. But there's no shortage of Amazon work and sustainability. And actually, if your viewers want to visit our website, we have all types of sustainability information and pledges there on the website, so you can take a read on it. But it's deep, it's wide, and it's definitely a commitment at the Amazon level.
Fantastic. Well, Ramu, I think we should go to some questions, since we got a good dozen questions stacking up here.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. So looking at the questions here, so a panel participant asks, how your work covers the global space. And we mentioned, a number of countries, AWS is in.
Sure. So everything we do, we try to ensure that we have a global lens on that work. So we actually have a geo leader that has started to build, and they're pretty much the building blocks are in place, where we have employees who only focus, or I should say not just employees, but inclusion, diversity, and equity practitioners that only focus on work outside of the United States. It's very easy when you're an ID&E practitioner in the United States to only focus on our issues, because there are many. But we have a team that's set up to ensure that all of our work has a global lens, that we're actually starting to collect diversity data outside of the United States for this very reason, in Malaysia and in Singapore, in New Zealand. And so everything we do, again, has a global lens, and we do have a global team that works with our business leaders, even outside of the United States, to move this work forward.
Awesome. Well, that was from Alfreda Robinson, so thank you for that question. Let's go to Joe. Joe asks, how do you support the indifferent or non-evangelist to bring them into the DEI conversation?
The indifferent or the non-evangelist. I will tell you, I'm a low-hanging fruit girl, right? And so I like to build with folks that are ripe and ready to go. And I believe that others will come along on the journey. So I tend to focus my attention, and I'm talking more personally, as opposed to there probably would be, if you had someone else from my team on that to answer this question, they may go right at the hardest folks, right? The folks that need the most time and the most attention. Me, I like to start first with the folks who are ready, that are ripe, that are curious, that want to learn and be curious, as opposed to working really hard and spending a lot of energy on changing folks' mind. I think when folks see the work that you're doing, they get excited and they get interested, and they'll ask questions, and that'll open the door then to work with those folks that may be more challenging.
Yeah, I'm a fan of micro affirmations rather than microaggressions. All the small things you can do that will collectively make people want to stay, and building those better allies. So yes, I think the people who are there, and they can maybe be that bridge to the next level up of people who need to be brought into that conversation.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, and I had another follow-up to that. You've talked about people who are ready to learn. How does that learning happen? And we face this issue, even with employees here at UC Berkeley. How can people learn?
Well, I think first it starts with personally folks taking the time to read, to educate themselves, right? To understand this work and why we do this work from the perspective of folks that don't look like them. For me, digging into Asian culture and history in the United States, or digging into LGBTQ plus issues or transgender issues specifically, and some of the things that are facing those communities. So I think number one, it's just really taking the time to learn and be curious. I will use that leadership principle again. I talk a lot about learning and being curious, because I think that it's so important in this space. And there was a second part of your question, Ramu. Can you repeat that second part?
I think you've addressed it. Sort of, how people can learn if they're eager to know more. what are the vehicles for them to accomplish that learning?
Well, I'll also add too, take advantage of trainings,
Mhm.
take advantage of learning opportunities. We offer learning opportunities at Amazon. I mentioned our 100, our goal for 100% completion of our training in inclusion, diversity, and equity. But even in addition to that, we ask Amazonians to do more, right? Join an affinity group and join an affinity group that doesn't necessarily resonate with you or your own personal experience, again, to learn and be curious about others. So that's hopefully helpful.
Yeah, thank you.
I just noticed that Joe asked a follow-on question. She says, quote, especially if they are in a leadership position. So if we take this as a question of somebody whose boss is not buying into this, what can you do as an employee to kind of maybe introduce your boss to why this matters?
Yeah, well, and the good thing about having the company-wide training is because it's so that everyone has a baseline, right? And so the person who's asking this question, their boss would at least have 45 minutes of training, right, on what it means to be an inclusive leader. My advice is, don't take it all on yourself. There will be opportunities that will maybe open the door to have these conversations, but they're hard conversations, and you have to manage your own self-care in it. So, if you're trying to be an ally for others, that's one thing. But if you're trying to get your boss or your manager into a place because you're feeling microaggressions or you're feeling inequitable treatment, then I'd say use your avenues, leverage your avenues as an employee in order to seek help. In some companies, there are warm lines and things like that, but don't take it all on your own shoulders would be my advice, because that's a heavy burden to carry, and you shouldn't have to do that. You shouldn't have to bring your boss along on the journey when you feel as though you're not receiving the treatment that you should based on your race or your gender or any other protected class.
I'm glad you brought up the emotional labor, because especially with all the social justice events that have happened this year, people don't necessarily always want to be the representative, always want to be the one
That's right.
leading these conversations. So it's important to bring up that personal safety as well.
That's right.
So Nancy asks, what are your views on quotas? Are they required or a hindrance in the long term?
I don't necessarily have a view on quotas. We don't use quotas. We work backwards from goals here at Amazon. So I don't really have an opinion on quotas. Even as a lawyer, I don't have an opinion on quotas necessarily. It's not something we use.
Great.
Yeah, the only thing I have related to that is California passed legislation to have quotas for women on boards, and it is actually shifting the dial, but it's more like we shouldn't need that sort of reinforcement. We should be having diversity on the boards because it makes better board decisions. So yeah,
Well,
it's a challenging question, really.
Well, and Jill, to that point, is intersectionality a part of those quotas in California? I don't know, right? Because you have women, but what if it's slanted to its more, I don't know, Asian women or white women, and less Black women, So I just think you have to be really careful when you're talking about quotas. That's not a dig to the California legislature. I'm sure that they, made the decision for the state that's needed for the state. But yeah, just
Yeah, no,
not
I
not an
think
area.
that's a
Mhm.
good point, which is you want to bring people with different experiences. And if they all went to the same college and they all had the same
That's right.
socioeconomic experience, they're not really bringing a different perspective to the board.
That's right. That's right.
Okay, so next question from Kelsey. Davey, I think you've sort of addressed this already. I think this question was asked sort of early on in the conversation, but I'll pose a question to you. So how granular is your equity inclusion breakdown? I'm hearing about Black talent, but not hearing about other identities. How are you
Mhm.
considering this diversity when setting metrics?
Well, I actually did talk about other demographics, so I can repeat kind of some of our goals. Just to be clear, our work goes beyond our Black employees, but we do have a very specific and intentional focus on our Black employees. So I'll just lift a couple of these statements that I made earlier. We're looking to retain employees at statistically similar rates across all demographics, build a scalable mechanism in our connections to inspect inclusion sentiment by demographics for all employees. We're looking at statistically significant demographic differences in our performance ratings. That's not for any specific race. The same we're looking at for our in attrition and low performance ratings, again, not based on any race. So just want to be very clear. Also reaching 1.6 million underrepresented students. I didn't say that was specifically for Black students, but that's for all underrepresented students. So this is work that we're getting after, not to the exclusion of any others.
So you talked a little bit earlier about belonging, kind of differentiating that. Rhonda McDougall asks, any suggestions on ways to address a predominantly white organization to make the culture more inclusive to better support people of color to stay and feel included?
Well, that would probably take a longer conversation. I would say seek a consultant. Bring in folks that actually know this work, understand this work, can help dig into the reason for that organization being pretty much all folks of the same race, maybe even most of the same gender. But bring in an expert to help you navigate that space. And I wouldn't try to do it alone.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. I work a lot with startups, and there's some data around if you get to 20 people, the culture is already set. And so how important it is to get diversity really early on in even these very small companies.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so another member of our audience asks, so do you have advice for local and county governmental departments with no current DE&I plan or initiatives? Where do they
Oh, wow. So that's not a space I work in right now, but we do have folks that are in Amazon that do this work. I come from public policy, but I was actually in federal public policy. So I worked directly with members of Congress, and hey, they could teach me how to do the work as opposed to me working with them, helping them to do the work. So I'm sorry, but I don't think that I could offer any advice to local governments. I think it's best to ask the folks who actually do that work and know it well.
All right.
Let's see. Vanessa Sam asks about the AAPI community, given the recent rise in anti-Asian sentiments and the longstanding challenge of the bamboo ceiling and the myth of the model minority. Can you speak to that?
Well, just want to say it was last week or the week before, Jay Chan on my team led an Amazon-wide inclusion town hall on this very topic. And she was so thoughtful. She and the other folks that worked on, actually our affinity group, our Asians at Affinity Group work with her on this town hall, but very thoughtful about how we approach this conversation with our employees, giving a space for folks to share. And using visual art is something that we did, inviting others along on the journey. But thousands of people jumped on into this town hall. So I would say it's a good place to start the conversation by really bringing everyone together, giving them the opportunity to see how others are talking about it. A space for allies to come and to get advice on how to be helpful to the community. Yeah, hopefully that's helpful. But that's how we have, and this is not the first town hall we've had on this topic. We actually had one this time last year at the beginning of the COVID pandemic, and just full circle, unfortunately, having to do it again because of the rise in violence.
How does the town hall work when there's such a large number of people? Do you do breakout rooms? I'm just trying to figure out how you do this thing at scale and still facilitate that kind of listening and conversation that you're talking about.
Well, yeah, that's kind of what I was getting at. Very interactive. I can't attest to it being my idea, but even the visual art, because different people take in information in different ways. And so the fact that there was the visual artist in order to explain kind of the impact on the community through art, and then having people who provided testimonials. They wanted to talk. It was probably therapy for them, kind of to talk through how this experience has changed them. Other folks giving advice around actions that you can take. It was, I want to say, an hour, or maybe a little bit more than an hour of a jam-packed kind of coming together of the community, but using different mediums in order to help this information and this advice land, regardless of kind of where you come in on this conversation.
Thank you.
All right.
Sure.
So next question from Nidhi. LaDavia, I think you've touched on this already, at least in the context of COVID, but maybe you can say a little bit more. So how do you support and promote return to work for people who take a long break in their career, people who take a break for childcare, elder care, et cetera, or other reasons?
Sure. So there's actually a rant back program that we have in order to help folks, and that's just not just with COVID, but also mothers, fathers that take leave. So I would say that the rant back program is probably the most specific example that I'd have to answer that question. But it just gives you a plan and more time. Some people come back at 50% of time as opposed to coming back straight away. So it's one example.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Dora asks a very good question here. What would you advise folks in the ID&E space to decompress from the work?
Boundaries are important. So just looking directly to my ID&E practitioners, you got to set boundaries. I would say boundaries and then self-care. And if I was to put them in the order, I would say boundaries first, because you can't get to self-care if you're giving all of your time and your energy to everyone else. When you decide that you're going to take time off, take that time off, unplug, turn off the television, really take the time to recharge and reset. And then self-care, we all have different self-care routines. For me, just quiet time in the morning, not rolling over and going straight to the cell phone, in the morning is important. So 30 minutes before bed and 30 minutes after I wake up, I try not to touch this thing, right? I try not to check my email. So I just restate that. Boundaries, setting those boundaries, making sure that people respect those boundaries, communicating those boundaries, and sticking to them yourself. And then also that self-care, whatever routine it is that works for you, make sure that you take care of yourself. You can't take care of others if you don't take care of yourself. It's like when you're on planes. I know many of us haven't flown in a while, but when they say, you have a small child that's traveling with you, you put your mask on first and then you put their mask on. Why? There's a good chance you won't be able to put their mask on if you don't put yours on first, right? So just really important to prioritize self-care.
I think that's very good advice, especially in this always on COVID situation. My boss recently sent out an email saying, I know it's staying light later, but that doesn't mean you don't stop working. You should still stop.
That's right.
Okay, so Nidhi's asked another question. What kind of topics and issues come up during an ERG meeting, and how do you handle sensitive issues?
Yeah, so I belong to employee relation to ERGs. We call them affinity groups at Amazon, so it's even hard for me to what does ERG mean? But many topics come up in ERG meetings and affinity group meetings. Not sure where to start there, but I specifically can talk about my advisory capacity for our Women's At organization, and we plan, of course, our programming. We talk a bit about maybe things that are blocked for our executive team, and ways that us as executive sponsors can help unblock those things. We talk about our budget for our programming. So many things that come up in those conversations, but from my perspective as an executive at the company, kind of sit in a different spot with our affinity groups. Hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah.
All right, new question from Robert Wilson. Does AWS utilize any outside consultants for helping with the ongoing evaluation of inclusion strategy, or is all this work resourced internally?
We do a lot of work internally. And so I'm sure that there are folks that have consultants, but the work that we are doing right now, we're doing it internally.
Awesome.
Sure.
Okay. So Martitza asked the question, LaDavia, you've already talked a little bit about reading as part of educating yourself. So do you have any books to recommend to learn more about diversity and inclusion?
Oh man, if only I had time to read. Let's see, what am I reading now? I'll tell you the truth. Right now, and it's not just on inclusion, diversity, and equity work. For me, it's around self-care. So I'm reading something called In His Image, and for me, it's a book that women of faith tend to read and journal on. So that's what I'm reading now. So I'm sorry that I can't provide more ideas there, but I'm sure there are others that can drop in the chat and talk about some things that they're reading. Bandwidth and reading for me doesn't really it doesn't really work out well.
There was a very funny comment on Twitter that said, the Surgeon General, or no, the CDC recommends that you finish reading the books on your shelf before buying new ones, even if you've been vaccinated.
Yeah. I actually, during COVID, I took to puzzles, and just trying something different, something I probably would have never done. So yeah, less reading.
I'm a
more
puzzle
puzzles.
person. I can see that. That's a good one.
Well, and
All
now I'm
right.
interested in coloring. So, adult coloring is a thing now.
Oh,
So
yes.
I'm considering doing more coloring. But for me, this goes back to self-care. So less about reading, and I respect the question, but for me, the additional time that I have outside of work, I try to use that for self-care and to do things that just make me happy and help me disconnect.
Fantastic. All right, let's see. Where would you start with any agency company with no current DE&I plan and limited initiatives? Context: there are unpaid committees that focus on diversity enrichment, but nothing within policy or procedures to assist in diverse advancement and retention.
Yeah, so I am so humbled to be a part of Amazon, where this work is not new. And we're not looking for incremental change. We're actually looking to accelerate always in this space. But I understand that there are some companies that are really early in their journey. First thing I'd say is it seems like this employee may be a part of this kind of unpaid council that advises on this work. And usually those unpaid councils are made up of people who unfortunately probably need the support, as opposed to being the ones that are providing the support. You have to really decide for yourself, whoever's asking this question, if this is a job that you want to take on, because I do believe that companies owe it to their employees to make sure that they're set up for success in this area. And that means real investment. That means a team of people. It means at least one person that's dedicated every day to waking up and thinking about these challenges, and working to solution in a very specific way to what it is that company needs at this moment in time. So I just say to that person, if you are one of those unpaid committee members, you should think about how you move leadership in your company to making some real investment. So, maybe you're an affinity group that has support, but not necessarily the only group of people moving this work inside of this company, and usually at times without the buy-in of the execs that make a lot of the decisions.
Thank you.
So there's another question that's really about personal and professional advice. Genta asks, can you give me any advice for overcoming peer pressure?
Advice for overcoming peer pressure. I think this goes back to boundaries, right? I was talking more about boundaries for self-care and just for just personal, but you have to also set your boundaries around what you'll allow others to influence you to do. You have to be your own person and make your own decisions, because you're going to have to deal with the consequences of your decisions. So really important to think about that. It's one thing to receive advice from peers, but peer pressure to me sounds like something that's more negative, not positive. And so would definitely just remind you that, the consequences of your actions are yours and yours alone. So remember that as folks are pressuring you to do things that you don't necessarily agree with.
Right. Thank you.
All right. This is a good one. We talked earlier about various ethnic and gender and even accessibility. This person asks, how does Amazon address inclusion when it comes to hiring older workers? How are current employees who are older exposed to Amazon diversity and inclusion processes? And are there real growth opportunities for everyone?
That's a great question. And I want to be perfectly honest. It's not something that I've really dug into here recently. So I'm going to be honest about that. There's not a specific program we have for quote unquote older employees. It's honestly not something that don't dissect out people based on age, but I mean, look, age is there's a diverse community, right, of people that are of a certain age. But yeah, that's a good question that it's going to stump me. I'm not sure I can answer that question, but it's something that it's a learning opportunity for me. So maybe I should dig in a little bit deeper around ageism and how that may be affecting our employees and what we can do differently around ageism. I will tell you, our tenured Amazonians tend to, and when I say tenured, to be 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years with Amazon, tend to do very well overall in the company, and to feel as though, for the most part, you get to 5, 10, 15 years, you've kind of hit your stride and you found that this is a place that you like and you want to stay. So I think of it more as tenured employees as opposed to kind of older employees, or something from an age perspective, but definitely something that I'll think about moving forward. So thank you for the question.
Right. So we have one more question here, another seeker of advice. So someone in the audience asks, I was recently excluded from a meeting that I'd been attending for the past year. What's the best way to handle this problem?
I believe that being direct is probably the best course of action. And so not sure who excluded you, but have to believe that you could figure out who excluded you. And I'd ask them directly, why was I excluded? And if you'd like to be included, I'd ask directly, I'd like to be included. So please include me in the next meeting. That's my advice. Be direct.
Well, that actually leads nicely into kind of a closing question I wanted to ask you, which is, when we think about this work, how do you approach unblocking? How do you approach making opportunity equitable for everyone?
It's such a good question. Unblocking it's actually a term that we use a lot at Amazon and AWS. It's my job as the leader of my team to unblock things and ensure that they have the resources that they need in order to get this work done at a scale that will really impact us across AWS. And so that's one perspective, which is kind of as a manager in this space, or as a leader in this space. But I think also unblocking just generally it's what we do as diversity leaders. We seek to open the door in an equitable way, so that everyone is on the same footing. It's probably our ultimate goal in doing this work is to ensure that opportunities are unblocked, that ceilings are shattered, right? Whether it's the glass ceiling or the bamboo ceiling, you name it, but removing those ceilings so that anyone, regardless of who they are, how they look, where they're from, how old they are, can feel as if they belong and are valued, can be themselves, their authentic selves, wherever they are, whether it's at work or any place else. So I think that that idea of unblocking is probably the ultimate goal of those of us who do this work. And I'm not sure if you ever stop unblocking. I'm not sure if it ever ends. I kind of talked about our day one mentality. When you stop unblocking, it's probably day two. So yeah, I love that question. Thank you for that question.
Thank you.
All right, so that wraps up our event for today. LaDavia, I want to thank you for being here. Really appreciate your insights and making time for this conversation. I know you're incredibly busy, so really appreciate your perspective on all of these really critical issues. I want to thank Jill, co-moderator today, and the whole staff that made this event possible. And of course, thank you to the audience for being here and for being so perceptive and engaged with this conversation.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.